So the world that we're living in today, as I say, was planned long ago. I've mentioned many of the big authors who took part in the planning stages. Often they dealt with philosophy, and they were classed as philosophers, many of them. And they wrote their own books and memoirs, and you'll find the accolades for them in many universities across the world, the Ivy League universities, for helping to plan this big society on behalf of their masters. And the masters, of course, are the ones with more cash than they have, the international banking families. And there's not very many of those characters, guys who actually lend to nations. But this is the plan, as I say. We're living through it today. They've almost finished their mission. You can follow them down through history as they move into a country, build it up as an empire through trading and war eventually, and then collapse it behind them, leaving it in masses of debt. And meanwhile, before they've left, of course, they've already set up another country to hop into and do the same thing again there. When the money pulls out, the countries basically collapse behind them, left with massive debt. And that's what you've seen all down through history. It's interesting to me that Arnold Toynbee and others, big people at Oxford University, and there were actually two of them, a father and a son, talked about this system. And the US eventually would be the empire for a while, the policeman for a while of the world, and then it would be flattened, basically. That's what you're seeing now. Back after this. Hi folks, we're back and we're cutting through the matrix. Perception is what everything really runs on, and how we perceive things. And even in ancient times, they used to alter perception. The priests did it, at least for the ancient people in the old pagan times, as they call paganism. But you'll find that at one time the priests would, in other countries too, even in Latin American countries in ancient times, as well as in the Middle East, the priests would, who had studied the stars for God knows how long. We'll never ever know just how long humankind really is, at least for knowledge-wise, that is. Civilization didn't start with the city, and it didn't start really just with the writing that we know of. It started long, long before, in previous times, even previous disasters. But the thing is, the priests always knew the art of controlling the general public in any country. And they eventually taught the people that if they didn't hand in their goodies and toss a few diamonds or jewelry their way, or some gold, silver, or something that sparkled and had some value, then the sun wouldn't come up. And they would do their ritual singing to the sun every morning just before dawn broke. And of course, people were too afraid really to deny them, because they were terrified of the darkness. In ancient times, darkness was a scary thing, because you didn't know what was coming at you in the dark, either people or animals, kind of much like today. So, but anyway, that's how they drew in the loot from the public. And eventually, after a generation or two, of course, it's quite natural. The children grow up thinking it's all quite natural. These guys bring the sun up every day, and they're awfully important for your survival. Today, it's a bit different. It's scientists, of course, who've waged a 500-year war on the old religions, and they've taken over the place of the priests, because they don't even have to name them now a lot of the times in articles that they hand out to the newspapers. They just say experts say, and a specialist and so said, and that's all we have to hear. Exactly as Bertrand Russell said in one of his books back in the 1940s. They would train the public to listen to experts until they couldn't think for themselves. And the trick to that is that you don't perceive for yourself. Same thing, you alter perception on things. You find the same thing with behavior modification. It's really geared towards altering the person's perception on any event or thing that's happening. And that happens also with whole populations via the media. Something that Bernays knew awfully well, because he gave America its consumer society. And he was a big manager. He worked alongside presidents to give thoughts to the people, to get them on board for wars, that type of thing. He was an excellent con man. He just knew the tricks of the trade, and obviously he had been taught since a very early age to do so. So these are sciences which have always existed, kept quiet, initially through priests in ancient times, and eventually up to the Enlightenment. They started to break through then, but still kept pretty secret amongst a few. And then it carries on to today, because knowledge is power. And even the old alchemists, under the guise of hocus pocus for their masses to believe, were actually teaching their disciples how to conquer the mind, basically, how to con people, how people really did behave, especially in the mass type situation, the crowd as they called it. And these techniques came down through the ages. Now they're, of course, sciences. And they always said, too, in the old alchemists, that their real secrets were making things like explosives and stuff like that, things which really did work. They would sell dearly to kings and queens or governments because it would give them power over governments. And that's actually how it is today, in a sense. All governments now look towards the experts, the scientists, for all advice, and they outsource, as I like to call it, all their stuff to all these different organizations that eventually are, of course, are private organizations, and you end up with this new feudal system that Carroll Quigley said was the aim and the goal of the Council on Foreign Relations. Always a new feudal system where the CEOs would be basically the captains, and the captains of industry would be the new feudal overlords. And we already have that. Governments really are pretty helpless today because the guys that go in there don't really know very much. What good is a degree in law? And most of them are lawyers, of course. If you're going in to be appointed the Minister of Health or the Minister of Physics or something like that, I mean, it's no use at all. And so now, of course, they're openly bringing on environmentalists and so-called specialists onto the teams. And you don't elect them, of course, they're just appointed. And they now have a big say, a big clout, because they're the new high priest, you see, of government. And we know that government is really a charade. If you've been listening to this program or broadcast, I should say, over the years, government really has always really been a sham. Francis Bacon put that out quite succinctly when he wrote a kind of a treatise or basically a resume to the king, and to show how smart he was at conning the public. And he said that the public really should always be kept in the dark, basically, as to the true machinations of where the government's really going for, the goals of government. Nothing has changed. The trick, of course, is to alter again perceptions by giving you a massive media, a variety, you think, of media, in order that so that you all chat about the same things. Very simple trick. You're all chatting about the same things. Your opinion's already given to you via the media, or you actually follow it to the desired conclusion, each story, for instance, and that's how they're written. There's no real honest news out there at all on anything, and the rest of it is just trivia. But all the big stuff is kept out of the papers, and it always has been kept out of the papers. There's very few reporters out there that are genuine. John Pilger has done an awful lot of good work on exposing, and being a reporter himself, or an investigative reporter. There are very few of them, of course, but he's done a lot of many different documentaries on how the big world system works, and it also justifies and verifies what I've said earlier. When the big boys move in with the cash, they build up a country, and they'll use a kind of fascist system or dictatorship to keep slave labor going across the world. And then, of course, when they see something better somewhere else, they just pull out and leave the mess behind them. And that's how it's really always been. Same thing with embedded reporters in war. There's nothing new whatsoever about that. Pilger's done a documentary on that, one of his last ones, in fact, to show you how that operates from World War I onwards, especially. So, at the bottom level, we are still dependent basically upon from what the media throws at us, basically the chicken feed. The stuff has been through all the filters and the sieves of the farm until you're left this chicken feed at the bottom, and you're supposed to make sense of it. Well, I always think of Albert Pike, because he said that a person who wouldn't use their own intellect, meaning your judgment, your intellect, your reasoning power, a person who wouldn't use his own was nothing more than meat on the table and a beast of burden by choice and consent. And that's really how you're viewed, you see. You're given a lot of clues, a lot of hints, but you'll still wait to be told what to do by the same media. Brzezinski talked about this too. He said the people eventually will expect the media to do their reasoning for them. And he actually said that in one of his books in the 1970s. And that's all come true. Most folk today if you told them what was happening, even with radiation, they'd wait till the media told them if it was too unsafe to stay there, or they really want to believe the media. If the media tells them just stay where you are, it's fine, So that's how people are. They will not use their own individual, and that's the key, individual abilities to reason out anything is given to them. Many folk too get hostile, very hostile, to bring up any truth whatsoever that makes them feel uncomfortable. Now this is again because society has been trained through generations actually with a scientific technique, again outlined by Bertrand Russell. And he said back in the 30s and 40s that eventually the public will be given a form of an egocentric and egocentric society where the world will revolve around each individual, and they'll seek pleasure and avoid pain. Now he's talking there about mental pain, things which make you feel uncomfortable, and that's what you have today. And that's why you get reactions from people who don't want to listen to you, and they get hostile if you persist. They're waiting for Big Brother to tell them that everything's going to be nice and cozy and comfortable for them. That's what they want to hear. You're looking at damaged people. They're totally conditioned. They're perfectly conditioned, and that's the problem.